I'm absolutely delighted to bring to you someone who's becoming a great friend, but inspirational in oh so many ways. Attorney, mediator, author, blogger, Gabrielle Hartley. Gabrielle has a fascinating background, and one of the things that I really appreciate about her ultimate rules for negotiating conflict is the important message of how we can recalibrate how we view conflict. We can expand our repertoire for how we interpret what's happening for us in conflict. So you've got to listen to this. She's got a great sense of humor, wonderful insights. So listen now. Gabrielle Hartley, attorney, mediator, author, and blogger. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc. It's time to decode the conflict mindset. Welcome, Gabrielle.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, because I was totally influenced by your message where you talk about the power to powerfully recalibrate your relationships. And, I love building on that because that's what I'm all about too when it comes to mindset and empowerment from within. And so we're going to come back to that, Gabrielle, because I'd like to first share with our viewers and listeners a little bit about your background so they have some idea of the wealth of experience that you bring to to this world of conflict. It's pretty powerful. And so with that, I don't even know where to begin. You have such an extensive background. Certainly
that's what happens when you get to be my age.
Yeah. I do that too. It's like, well, if you've been around as long as I have,
Exactly.
and you follow your passions,
That's right.
It's easy to do lots of things that are of interest. And that certainly is reflected in your background. So not only a family law attorney, but now a practicing mediator in family law. And I like this little statistic, known for keeping 99% of your cases at the settlement table, which means you successfully resolve them, right?
That is true. Although I always warn people that I'm actually not a magician, but I had a client who used to say, "So says you." But yeah, I say often I'm really bad at a lot of things, but I'm very good at making very complicated cases resolve. So I feel very grateful for that.
That's great. Well, that says a lot right there. Yeah. So, and you gain that experience and insight from doing things like clerking for Justice Jeffrey Sunshine in the New York State Supreme Court, the matrimonial portion of that. And you've also served clients online in both New York State and is it Massachusetts or Maine?
Yeah, no, Massachusetts.
Okay, I thought so.
I actually now mediate across the entire country now that I'm purely online.
Great.
For 25 years, I have been working in New York, and for 15 years in Massachusetts.
Okay, great. Well, yes, you're part of the wave of being able to work nationally and internationally. Yes. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the book that you authored, Better Apart, The Radically Positive Way to Separate. Which was released in 2019 through HarperCollins. You also launched the Positive Divorce Movement. And so you become quite the positive divorce face in media culture, right?
It comes from being a product of what was called a broken home when I grew up, which I really did not like that language. It always felt really bad. And it also didn't feel true to me. My parents were really on the forefront of shared parenting. When I was 9 and my brother was 6, my parents split up. They were a bit ahead of their time. They brought us to a therapist where we talked about what co-parenting plan would make the best sense. And I was actually quite involved in the entire process. And throughout my entire childhood, they were almost like braggy about how incredibly they divorced. And I didn't think it was that great in all respects. I mean, they were divorced. They still fought. But then when I found myself working for Judge Sunshine, I realized how horrible the process could become for people, how much it feeds on itself, so much negativity. And I also have to say that the experience clerking for the judge was better than any therapy I could have gone to, because I realized how blessed I was to have my parents. And it really inspired me to do what I do now, which is to activate lots of other professionals to do things in a different way, to actually try to close cases from the inside out so that the legacy, both for their clients and then for their clients' children, their children's children will be improved. So we can actually do good and do well. So that's pretty exciting.
Well, that's great. Well, I didn't grow up in a divorced home, but I am a product of divorce. And I have to say my own experience, although I was already doing divorce mediation, but my own experience of going through that and with a litigator really shaped and influenced my mindset about how to parent and how to and how people could be redirected. And that's why I was so excited to have you on my show, because I think you have a powerful message to decoding that conflict mindset. Yeah. So I want to let our audience know that you've been in New York Times, New York Post, U.S. News and World Report, and just to name a few, and on dozens of podcasts. And so I definitely want you to say more about that. And of course, you contribute to the field ongoing as part of the ABA dispute resolution section. You're vice chair of the membership marketing, co-chair of the ABA mediation. Huh? What was
I said, you're going to be my spokesperson. You're making me sound like, thank you. It's all true. It's all true. Just hearing you say it. I guess I do a lot of work.
It blows me away to know how much people, can do and contribute. And so it's just really great. Yeah. And one thing too, I hadn't realized this until recently, because we worked together on another program, but that you've turned your process, your better part into an online method that you now train other professionals in how to go through that. So that's really exciting.
I created something called the close process, which basically breaks down how to resolve any dispute, whether you're a person going through a dispute or you are a professional helping people go through the conflict to bring it to a close in 5 steps. So yeah, it's really exciting. I just finished a whole class of students, which was awesome.
Oh, great. That's really good. I mean, that's the other thing about going to the virtual world that makes training so much more accessible. And
Totally.
easy for use. Yeah. And you still remain of counsel to Lisa Zederman's law firm in Westchester and New York City, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And of course, if our listeners and viewers want to know more about you, they can visit your website at GabrielleHartley.com, right?
That's right. GabrielleHartley.com.
Okay, great.
2 L's and an E at Gabrielle. Some people can't find it.
Yeah. Okay, very good. And so, one of the things, I like to frame some questions to my speaker so that, we can sort of follow along. And I really want our audience to hear your message. And, and that's what this podcast is all about in terms of decoding the conflict mindset. And so when people are in disagreement, isn't it sometimes better to walk away, or do you feel people should always try to work things through?
Well, it depends on what the disagreement is. Sometimes walking away, what I like to say is taking a step back is generally the best way forward. So walking away doesn't mean cutting off a conversation necessarily, although obviously in some circumstances that is necessary, but it may be in shifting how you're viewing the conversation, checking your own reactivity internally, checking your own narrative about whatever it is that's happening, noticing the other person's narrative, knowing who you're having your miscommunication with or your cross communication with, and then coming back with a different angle, with a different perspective. So often we're so complicit in our own undoing, right? We are quite literally part of the problem. And even me, and maybe not you, Dr. D, but most of us, we get into these double binds with people and in circumstances, and we actually create a lot of our own problems. So if we can learn to notice our actions and our reactions, then often we don't even need to address what we would have seen as an issue head on, because everything becomes more nuanced and we can navigate more smoothly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I've long had a saying, and I know I didn't originate it, or so I think, but I'm going to say, imagine where I could be if I just got out of my own way.
Oh my gosh. Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. That is so true, because we're really we limit ourselves with our thinking, but we also, the exciting part is we can also expand ourselves with our thinking. Right? Like I wrote my first book after I was 40 years old, right? And like I hadn't written a book before, and I had it in my mind that I really wanted to bring a much bigger message, change the divorce conversation, be a leader in the divorce conversation changing mission, which didn't even exist 10 years ago when I started to do it. And you know, that's actually how I met many of the other leaders in the field, is that we were all coming to the same sort of shared consciousness. And yeah, so anyway, I'm getting off track of your question.
I think it is important for people to recognize that this has been an evolution of thought. And I have to admit, I started my journey a little bit about 10 years before you did then. And I struggled because I found a very small population who really embraced some of the changes in strategy and techniques available. And I think it comes from my own training back in the late 1990s with my mentor, Dr. Dan Dana, who was also a psychologist. So I learned a great deal from his many years of experience, probably like you did with Judge Sunshine. And, so he really gave me some new insights, some new ways of thinking. And then, of course, I trained with Bill Eddy in the 2000s too. And so again, another shift in thinking there.
Well, what's interesting is when I was working for Judge Sunshine, and I was always very mediation and collaborative minded. And at the time, it really wasn't favored. It was really almost looked askance. And it really, society wasn't ready. In fact, when I was first looking for an agent to sell Better Apart, which incorporates a lot of mindfulness techniques, a lot of the agents got back to me saying, like, what does yoga and mindfulness have to do with divorce? I was like, oh my gosh, it was like so ridiculous. It has everything to do with divorce. It's the only way.
Yeah, it's almost like that saying, don't leave home without it.
Right.
Yeah. So, so it really it comes down to, as you say, looking at your own narrative, looking at the narrative of others. And so it's really embracing a lot of concepts of emotional intelligence, being aware of, how you show up and how you manage yourself, how others show up, and then how you manage that relationship with them. And so it's really preparing for that conversation when there's been disagreement.
And also preparing for the conversation with all the other people that you're going to have to interact with, preparing for, heaven forbid, the judgment, the self-judgment, the shame, re-narrating, right? I mean, whether you're a grown-up child of divorce or a grown-up who's been through a divorce, there's a shame narrative that takes a lot of work to work through. And when you come out on the other end, your life can be so much more full and even actually better for all that you've been through. Not to say that it's easier, that you want a divorce. I'm definitely not a divorce advocate, but I am a divorce professional. So.
Yeah. And so it goes back to, it's really not that divorce in and of itself is a negative thing, but it's how it's managed.
Correct.
And that's true of conflict.
Right.
A lot of great things come from conflict. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
A lot of positive ideas, a lot of new ways of thinking, a lot of new ways of doing, if we approach it from a problem-solving perspective. But when we don't manage it well and we get very reactive, then that's when conflict can really fuel the flames and grow even bigger.
Exactly. And that's what happens so much. I mean, we all see it today in the world, right? So dialing things back, bringing things in, listening to ourselves, and taking those gosh darn 3 breaths, taking that in, hold, out, hold, in, hold. And I am as hyper and kinetic as the most hyper and kinetic person. And, I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to all public schools. You don't need to be this calm Zen Buddhist to do some breathing. That's my point. Like, anybody can do it, and it really works. And like I said, when I started, sometimes you have to take a step back to move forward. And that applies if you're getting divorced, if you're having a spat with your best friend, your mother, your daughter, your spouse. It's all the same lessons, really, to your point.
Yes, absolutely. And you're so true. Deep breathing is powerful. I find a lot of people don't find the time to meditate, and I totally support meditation. But a lot of times people just don't find the time for it. And so I've come up with a breathing strategy called the 4x6. And so, one of the things having worked around people in relationships and conflict for so many years, sometimes people don't even remember what the conflict's about. They just know that they're in dispute. And so, boundaries become a very important element with people. And so you've talked about both disrupting and creating boundaries, some of the work that I've read of yours. And so say more about that.
So I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a person who's a lawyer who's thought about these issues for a very long time. But boundaries are your best friend. Mm-hmm. Boundaries are what create a container for you to exist in the world without becoming too moved internally by any external force, so that you can stay true and clear, because clarity is what's going to guide you forward. Now, if you're a person who was raised in a home where there's alcoholism or, any of the things that lend to having poor boundaries, overly enmeshed family systems, which you can speak about much more fluidly, I'm sure, than I can, we need to learn boundaries, right? Those of us who grew up in an environment like that. And just be patient with yourself, because when you're first starting to create boundaries, you may almost have like too firm a boundary because you're trying on boundaries for the first time, and it's a corrective stage. So you might even say to somebody, I need to take a little space. I keep coming back to that same thing. I need to take a little space right now for me. And it may be that you're not even saying it to them, but you're blocking them on the phone for 10 hours during the day because they're interrupting your day and getting you upset. And then you can unblock. Over time, just like any other muscle, you will get better at creating boundaries that feel more natural and more nuanced. So I raise that because I've seen that as an issue. Just like if you know someone who's very passive and they're learning to be more assertive, they may be almost aggressive to begin with because they really don't know how to just be assertive. So they think that being kind of over the top aggressive is what assertive people are doing, when it's actually not. It's much more nuanced. So boundaries can protect us. And there's so much media and attention around the idea of narcissists or NPD. And I happen to have my own opinions that I don't think everyone's a narcissist. I think that having a label is helpful to sort of describe a set of behaviors. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that it helps you, that's great. But the more important than dealing with understanding narcissists is understanding your own boundaries. Mm-hmm. And understanding how, if you have boundaries, that difficult person most of the time will find a new person to put their qualities on, right? You can't save the world. You need to save yourself. And if you have children, help your children to develop those muscles as well. There's something my grandfather used to say, which you've probably heard me say it 50 times also, which was, he used to say, never throw anyone away, just put them on a shelf. And when you're having a hard time, this is a little bit different than a boundary with someone who there are people who are just toxic for you. And with those people, you need to create a boundary, and then you're not going to have as much conflict because you're not dealing with them as much. They're not going to have as many ways to prick you. On the other hand, if you're going through a difficult time, let's say you're going through a divorce and you feel like your mother or your best friend or somebody's judging you or not getting you or making you feel bad, energetically shelve that relationship. It doesn't mean you're throwing them away. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean your mom was never loved you, your best friend never understood you. It just means they can't show up for you right now in the way that you need them to. And that's okay, and that's life. And I think there's a lot of value to holding on to relationships that have been important for a really long term of years. Maybe they need to be recalibrated. Maybe you need to relook at the level of importance or the weight that you give their opinions. But yet, I think that there's tremendous value in holding on to important relationships throughout the lifespan. That's my personal ideal. I know that not everybody agrees with that, but
yeah. Well, I really like how you say that, though, because whether it's mediation or whether I'm coaching, people struggle, and usually are struggling in their relationship either with self or with somebody else. And so, would you throw yourself away? No. And so, it's important not to throw those relationships away. Because it's oftentimes, in working through things then that we do grow, we learn, and then we can apply, we can live out what we've gained, and not looking at trying to repair those relationships actually and ultimately ends up hurting ourselves more than the other person.
That's right.
Yeah. And going back to your point about narcissism, I always like to share with people, it's like a continuum.
Right.
There's full-blown narcissism and then there's none, and then all of us will show up somewhere on that continuum. And so I like to say, I'm not here to diagnose anybody, even though I'm a psychologist, but instead talk about behaviors or tendencies. They may have narcissistic-like behaviors.
Right.
And we all do. We all put ourselves first
Right.
above everything else,
And in fact, if you don't, many, especially women, need to learn to put themselves first a little bit more. It doesn't make you selfish or greedy to care about yourself. It doesn't make you a bad person to need some support, maybe if you're getting divorced for some period of time, or maybe for the rest of your life, depending on how long. Like there's so much self-judgment that goes on. And especially when we get into the good bad dichotomy, that happens a lot in the narcissistic conversation.
Yes, yes. It's interesting. I am doing a professional development workshop series for a major public organization, and in that particular type of field, it is predominantly women. And so it's interesting, as I can watch all of them on the Zoom, and see their faces. And so, of course, I pay a lot of attention to behavior as well as communication styles. And so there's like you said, as women, it is really important that we learn to step out and put ourselves out there and in a positive way. And too many times we retreat, which is what oftentimes a lot of people do in conflict. They retreat and they get taken advantage of. They may not get their needs met. And so I really love what you've had to say as far as setting boundaries and taking a look at the narratives.
And getting clear, because you can set boundaries and just live in the anger. That's not going to get you far. It might protect you, but it's not going to help launch you. So to get to launch, you need to know what you want. You need to know what feels good. Like, pay attention to your feelings, especially, women. And I hate to say this because I'm sure there's men who fall in this category too. We're so busy. We're so busy doing. We're taking care of our parents, our mothers, our children, our partners, whatever it is, our bosses, if we have bosses, if we haven't broken free, like Dr. D and I. But, what about you? What about yourself? Beyond getting a manicure, right? Beyond self-care by a massage, which is great too, but what is your inner voice, your inner joy? Where are you going? Put your energy toward where you're going, and you might find yourself very surprised. It doesn't make you a narcissist. It might just make you somebody who's contributing in a way you never thought you could.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. When you talk about, having these challenging conversations, setting some boundaries and, again, how we show up, what would you say are, 2 or 3 tips that you have for people who, are facing this kind of challenging situation in their marriage or in their parenting?
So in terms of boundaries, particularly?
Yes.
Yeah. So one thing that I would say is to, as I mentioned before, if you're having a situation where you have that perpetual caller who keeps calling you or emailing you, you might feel like you're being stalked, even though you're not actually being stalked in the criminal sense of the word. There are things you can do. You can either set up a special email account or get on a co-parenting app like the FAIR app, or, some people use Our Family Wizard, whatever, some co-parenting applications, so that your communication is somewhere that's controllable, so you're not being bombarded, right? You can also very succinctly limit your conversations with people. Like, I used to have an issue. This is a story that I don't know if it's funny or not, but when I was around my later 20s, early 30s, my mom would call all the time. She would say, "Oh, there's an overturned vehicle on Route 57. Like, she was constantly filled with tips that were, she was concerned about something, typical like Jewish New York mom, like constantly calling. And I said to her one day, because I was always so upset with her. And then one day I had this clarity and I said, "Hey, Mom, I love you so much. And thank you so much for calling. And I know you're really worried about me. And I know you have my best interest, but I'm actually dreading picking up the phone every time you call me. So this is what I want to do. I want you to make a list of everything that's annoying you, or that you're thinking about, that you're worried about for me. And we'll pick a day. You can have a whole hour to tell me everything. I will totally give you your attention. I will give you full attention, and we can talk about them for a whole hour. And she was like, you're such a brat. And then she stopped doing it. It was the best thing ever. I set the boundary and it changed the behavior. So setting the boundary doesn't mean being mean. It doesn't mean slamming the door. It means creating rules, create a container. You can even tell your difficult ex, you can own, I feel agitated when we speak. It's not you, it's me. It would be really helpful if you would do this. I can't tell you what this is. Only you know what's going to work for you. Write me 1 email instead of 50 emails. Only call me at this time. Create rules that are not outlandish, rules that are that you can actually do, and you will have a much easier time navigating forward. If you find yourself in a situation where you're doing, for instance, drop off and pickups, you have kids at a house, and then what happens is your ex comes into the house. He still thinks it's his house. Have the drop offs and pickups at a park in between your houses. There's ways to navigate. Once the kids are back in school full time, have all the drop off and pickups at school or at camp. I mean, there are certain basic things. Some of the ways to create boundaries are more highly nuanced based on whatever your situation is. But for your listeners or viewers, I would say top tip number 1 is pinpoint the behavior that is triggering you and figure out how you can shift it, how you can recalibrate, reset, revamp, rethink that entire interaction, and then create some rule or guideline that either you're going to follow or you're going to kindly ask the other persons to follow. And remember, when you're asking the other person to do it, make sure you build them up first by making a neutral or positive statement to them about something. Maybe even a little dose of self-deprecation will not hurt the situation, because they're not going to want to feel like you're telling them what to do. More like they're doing you a favor because you're so frazzled, and that's okay. It takes nothing away from you to give them the sense of power if it's going to give you a feeling of peace.
There's a couple of things that you said, Gabrielle, in that right now that really sparked something in me. One is that, I'm sure that you do, I do too, is that, people who are going through these difficult relationship changes like a divorce, are so quick to the blame and shame game. It's his fault, it's her fault, he's got to change, she's got to change. In fact, I'm dealing with a situation where I'm coaching someone in a very high conflict. It's been going on for 6 or 7 years and still a problem. And it's always about what can dad do differently. And it's like, we need to shift that mindset and focus on what can you do to influence or impact him more positively, so that then he learns to respond to you in a different kind of way than what he has in the past. And so,
or just accepting that he or she has an inability or disability, and it just is that way. Right. So how you're, like, back to what you said in the beginning, like how you feel about it is only hurting you. So they're probably, they may be able to change. They may not be willing to change. Maybe they want to change. Maybe they have no clue what you're talking about, even though you've explained it to them a jillion ways with the help of lots of very, helpful people, and they just can't do things differently. If we look at how we are interacting, when we get away from the blame game and into the visionary clarity game, that's the game changer for conflict.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, that person, the other person may not be ready or be in that mindset to change. And so again, you can't make somebody do something, just like you were saying earlier. And so again, we want to think about how we can influence that. I wanted to go on for a second because, in your book, Better Apart, it comes up, so many times people feel they have to rush to legal counsel to represent them, and then they have to go to court to have their day in court. And I've seen it referred to elsewhere as the emotional justice. They're trying to seek emotional justice in the court, but the court's not designed for that. And so, going to court, how does that positively and negatively influence the outcomes in a divorce from your experience?
So the thing that's good about court, and I don't even go to court anymore at all. I just do online mediation and strategy. Going to court is good if you have someone who will not engage in mediation, someone who is avoidant. It will get their butt into the conversation. And sometimes you have to go to court. If you have someone who won't disclose what they have and they have a lot of money, if somebody is quick to say they have $8 million, but they might have 15 and they won't give you any disclosures, and you don't live in a state where disclosure is mandatory, which it's not mandatory across the country, that's a problem. You might need to go to court. Court, I wrote an article on Thrive Global that you can Google. It's called Beware the Stranger in Black Robes, because that stranger in black robes might not, first of all, might not agree with your perspectives on things. You don't know their story. You don't know who they are, what they've been through, who they're married to, divorced from, who their kids are, who their parents are, who you're going to remind them of. There's a lot of space in the law for a lot of judicial discretion, right? Big range. So don't think just because you have your day in court, you're going to really feel heard. Number one. Number two, even if you win today, that doesn't mean you're really winning in the long term, because you and your lawyer can effectively cause so much collateral damage that there is more long-term negativity cast upon your children, therefore cast upon you, due to the way that your case rolls out. Number three, my list you're going to have to cut me off at a certain point, but number three, the factors that you feel are so important, the affairs, the betrayal, the malfeasance, the nonfeasance, I don't know if that's a word, but all the things that matter to you that may really, really warrant a lot of therapy and tears and boundaries and all that, they just might not be legally relevant. They may have no weight whatsoever. So really, if you have a spouse who does not have a severe personality disorder, which makes it impossible for them to do things out of court, that's another one. And your spouse is reasonably honest and you can have a conversation. It doesn't mean you have to be low conflict. You can be mid or even kind of high conflict, especially with the online forum. You can still mediate. I always encourage everybody to get a legal opinion of what the range of outcomes is before signing anything. In fact, I only like to have one meeting with people until they each go to lawyers, because that way everyone is making decisions based on the full breadth of knowledge of what they are potentially standing to gain or lose. Because sometimes people say, they don't want to spend the extra $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is. And so we mediate. And then at the end, they say, I'm just going to have my lawyer look it over. And next thing you know, the whole thing blows up.
Okay.
So it's really important. Remember, your mediator is not there to tell you the law. They are not there. So if you're mediating with someone local who's also a lawyer, they might give you legal information. That's more of a conciliator's job. And they are certainly not going to advise you. So, my advice is to at least understand the law, with the asterisk that as of this date, across the United States, the laws are quite different in every state. So that, I think, is very that gives a lot of information to say that there's no objective right or wrong outcome. Because if you live in California or you live in Louisiana or you live in New York or Texas, you might have quite a different outcome, even though you're the same family with the same property, expenses, etc.
Yeah, those two really great points there is that, to make sure our listeners and viewers know that the role of legal counsel has expanded, over the last, 20 years or so, to that now people are operating more in a boutique setting where they will, give counsel, but not retain or represent people. And so, going to an attorney doesn't mean you have to, retain them to represent you. So you have to be very clear when you go into an attorney what you're looking for.
And make sure when you go into your attorney, you should have some sense of your finances, or at least understand what you don't understand. It's okay if you don't understand, because then your lawyer is going to say, well, you need to have full disclosure. Disclosure is everything. Disclosure.
Right. Yeah. So that's critically important. And I totally agree with you too. I know I've shifted the way I do my mediations, because I do deal with families in divorce, but primarily focus on the parenting plan end of it. But if you get everything worked out, and then an attorney can actually bring in new perspectives about the way they think it should be handled.
Right.
And now it's no longer your agreement that you carefully navigated through.
Right. And actually, what can wind up happening is that can really froth the pot and create issues in your dynamic with your soon-to-be ex, therefore upsetting the children. So you have to really remember you are part of a family system. Even if you're so over that person, your ex, I didn't make this up, your ex is not your child's ex. And also, your ex today, remember how you comport yourself through the process. You're going to look back on you in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. And you are going to want to look at yourself, I think, feeling proud of how you handled yourself.
Absolutely. Yes.
And you can be strong and kind.
Yeah. And that's where, yes, you're in the thick of it now, but, think through, and I've got an exercise on my tips and techniques to help people do that, but to think through, how do I want to show up on the other side? Like you said, what can I feel proud of in terms of how I handled this, regardless of how the other person handled it, in doing things in a way that's mindful, conscious, and calming, rather than agitating. And like you say,
we need to get you on the Better Apart blog with it sounds like you have a lot of amazing tips and tricks. So we need to get out there.
I would love to be there. Yes. Yes. So Gabrielle, I want to have you talk a little bit more about your book. It's on Amazon, and I want to make sure that people have your spelling. It's Gabrielle, Hartley, Hartley, right?
That's correct.
And it's available as an ebook, right?
It's a regular book, an ebook, hardcover, softcover, audio. You could get it at your local bookstores can get it. I mean, it's HarperCollins. You could just get it wherever, but it's easy to get on Amazon, Barnes and Noble online. And if you want to do, I've got a downloadable program. If you go to GabrielleHartley.com, you can do, I sort of take the first 5 chapters, which go over the Better Apart elements, and sort of give you some tips and some worksheets that you can work through on that. There's also, I have a weekly blog called the Better Apart blog, where we have, co-parenting, financial, wellness, nutrition, legal, mediation, all kinds of tips. And if you want to sign up to get that in your inbox too, you can just go to the Survive and Thrive opt-in on GabrielleHartley.com on the homepage, and you'll get that right into your inbox. And I've got amazing people such as yourself who are contributing to it every single week. So, there's that as well.
Well, fantastic. Well, I know since I've met you, I've certainly have given out your website to my clients to augment what we're doing, because
none of us can do this alone.
No, you need a team, and
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Gabrielle, it's just been absolutely delightful to have you here today, and so much to offer, and incredible insights, and definitely we're on the same wavelength of mindset.
Yeah, it's been my honor and a pleasure to be talking with you. You are an amazing, amazing person, and I want to also talk to you later about if you're doing co-parenting. Are you available across the country? Because we have to talk about that, because you are very much in need.
Okay. Well,
we need you. Not that you're in need, we need you.
Well, thank you. That is, given my own experience and the hundreds of families I've worked with, because I've also been a 730 child custody evaluator. So I see it at that end of things too. Yeah. That, I love helping people get through to the other side with their health and mind and body intact, and to live a better life and be a better influence on their children.
Awesome. Yeah. So important.
Yeah.
Thank
great.
you.
Well, thank you. You are amazing. And I love what you've done with your legal background and taking into the mediation world and contributing the ideas that you have, because you certainly come to it from a different perspective than I do, but yet we both have had personal experience with it.
It takes all of us to create something, and then everyone who hears us, they can bring it forward.
Yes. Yeah. One conversation at a time, right?
That's right. That's right. That's a good.
Decoding the conflict mindset is all about. So I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners, and particularly you, Gabrielle, for joining us today on the DCM podcast. And one of the things I've always noticed is that, and this stat goes back a long way, but even if people aren't successful in resolving their disputes through mediation, which is a very small percentage, they still feel very satisfied with the process for having being able to express themselves, hear their voice, and sometimes for the first time having their voice really heard.
That's right. And I think sometimes mediation, another good thing about mediation is it can address the nuance that you need addressed, that a judge is not going to get that. They're going to hear a case for, maybe an hour or two if you're really lucky and if you've spent $40,000 or $100,000. But in mediation, sometimes having the mediator really hear you can be even better than having the judge, because you're spending that time really one-on-one and they can really get to know you a bit more.
Yeah, part of the healing process.
That's right.
Yep. So, the world is very different now. We have many more avenues available to what used to be. And so the question is, are you ready? Are you ready to decode the conflict mindset and take a new approach for the differences, the disagreements, the disputes that you have in your life? And so if you liked what you hear today, please subscribe, get notified of up and coming podcasts that may be of interest to you, and share it with your social media network. Post on Facebook and LinkedIn. We'd love to get the word out. Like Gabrielle said, just carry the message forward, even if it's one conversation at a time.
It's the only way.
The only way. A better way. Okay. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc, decoding the conflict mindset, riding the technological magic carpet to a successful career. What Susan Guthrie brings to us in this next podcast is incredible in terms of the lessons learned that she's experienced out of the necessity of having to shift how she does business as a lawyer, as a mediator, and in different parts of the country. Susan is way ahead of the time when it comes to how to pivot quickly. Now, we've all been faced with how to pivot quickly over this last year or two. And yet she has insight, experience, knowledge gained about how to do that, not only successfully for her clients, but has parlayed into a whole new aspect of doing business. She has trained over 15,000 professionals worldwide. She is also the host of a podcast on learning to mediate online and divorce a better way. She has over 4 million listeners worldwide. I think we have something to learn here from Susan Guthrie. So Susan shares with us, a couple of key things. Being mired in our usual way of doing business is probably the most expensive mindset we can possibly have. So listen and learn as you hear from Susan Guthrie, acclaimed mediator, podcaster, speaker, presenter, a winner of awards and on various media outlets like CNBC, Forbes, and many more. She has something to teach us. So listen and learn. Subscribe below so that you make sure that you're going to hear about the next episode coming up. Thank you for joining us on Decoding the Conflict Mindset. This series was designed to bring to you the best in thought leaders to shape new worlds of thinking about working through disputes in the world, in your community, and in your home. Subscribe so you receive notification every time a new episode is launched.